Welcome, I'm Catherine Hadro, and this is EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. No pro-life protections. The House of Representatives passed the Equality Act and a COVID relief bill. One paves the way for abortion on demand, and the other includes abortion funding. We speak with pro-life Representative Claudia Tenney of New York. Catholic concern. HHS Secretary nominee Javier Becerra has a history of supporting assisted suicide. We get Catholic reaction, and we're joined by Pro-Life International speaker Stephanie Gray Connors, who's written a new book on assisted suicide and shares advice on how to best discuss this issue. And Billboard for Life. In a creative initiative, Polish pro-lifers remind people on and off the streets about our duty to protect the unborn. The Democrat-controlled House of Representatives passed two bills late last week, which quietly increase abortion funding and pave a way for abortion on demand. Pro-lifers are speaking out both on the Equality Act and the COVID relief bill. The Equality Act amends civil rights laws to forbid pregnancy discrimination, which pro-life groups warn could be construed to become an abortion mandate if a pregnant woman seeking an abortion claims discrimination if she's denied one. And the $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill, which also passed the House, does not include pro-life Hyde Amendment protections, meaning funding could go to elective abortions, abortion coverage, and to pro-abortion groups. Both bills now move to the Senate for consideration. Representative Claudia Tenney of New York joins us now from Capitol Hill. Congresswoman, welcome to the show. First, what's your reaction that your Democratic colleagues pushed the Equality Act and COVID relief bill through the House while there are these major pro-life concerns wrapped up in them?
Well, obviously, we're very concerned as a pro-life person with a very strong record, not only in Congress, but also as a member of the State Assembly, where we have one of the worst abortion laws in the nation that was passed by our Emmy Award-winning Governor Cuomo and celebrated. Late-term abortion was something that was enshrined in law in New York. So we were to turn to our federal government and the Hyde Amendment for protections and many other protections that the Republican side has championed for life. And now both of these bills are really disastrous in protecting the life of the unborn and our most vulnerable people in our communities. You know, funding Planned Parenthood again, as the so-called COVID relief bill does. But on the Equality Act, we do want to make sure that we protect everyone. We want to make sure that no one's discriminated against, including the LGBT community. But you can do that without discriminating against people for religious protections that are promised them under the First Amendment and guaranteed by our Constitution. Mm-hmm. So I'm very concerned about where these are going. I'm hoping that there's going to be a sane voice in the Senate to stop these, because we know once they get to the president's desk, he will sign them into law. And we really just don't want to go a step backward when we've made so much progress over the years.
Pro-life groups are warning that the Equality Act and what it could mean for pro-life conscience rights, that it might pave the way for pro-life doctors to be forced to commit an abortion if a woman claims pregnancy discrimination. Do you share those concerns?
Well, I'm concerned about the entire act. Obviously, that's one of the concerns that could potentially come out of that. The funding of late-term abortion and this push that the Democrats are taking us in, which is really the opposite of where our communities are going now. People are becoming more and more pro-life as the so-called science becomes real, as more and more parents are able to access sonograms and realize that, you know, these precious souls, need to be protected. And so we're going to continue to fight for life, as I always have. And we just have to be watchful. I urge everyone to call their senator and tell them not to vote for this so-called Pelosi bailout, we're calling it. It's really not COVID relief. Only 9% of the entire $1.9 trillion bill actually deals with COVID relief. It's full of these pro-abortion, pro-funding of Planned Parenthood type provisions that people aren't aware of when it's cast as a relief bill, which it's not.
Would you support a COVID relief bill that does not have pro-life Hyde Amendment protections?
Absolutely not. We must have the Hyde Amendment protections, and that's being actually circumvented by the Democrats in trying to pass this bill that really casts it as something else. We have to stand for life each and every day. It's a fight and a pledge that I've taken, and we need to continue to do that. Again, I urge all of your audience to call their senators and make sure we stop this bill. We've tried to stop it in the House, but it has gone forward and is going to head to the Senate, and we do not want this to become law. We need to protect life at all costs.
Congresswoman, while I have you, you are a representative in the state of New York, and your governor, Andrew Cuomo, is facing at least 3 sexual harassment allegations, but he's also facing criticism for his 2020 directive in which COVID-positive patients were sent to nursing homes, and there are reports he deliberately concealed data on nursing home deaths. You're calling on him to resign and for the Department of Justice to investigate. Why is that important to you?
The governor has committed a cover-up that I think is reprehensible. It undermines his ability to lead and to govern. Notwithstanding the concerns about the inappropriate behavior of the sexual harassment allegations, like everyone, I'm an attorney. The governor is entitled to due process. Interestingly enough, though, this same governor asked that Justice Kavanaugh be subjected to a lie detector test, and so maybe the governor would submit to that. But when similar allegations, and maybe they were more harsh for former disgraced Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, were revealed, the governor demanded his resignation. So I think it's time for the governor to use his own standard. But the nursing home cover-up, in many of the ways the governor has governed over New York in terms of his abuse of power on so many other issues. I served in the state assembly. Those are the main reasons that the governor should resign. 15,000 people, at least that we know of, went to an untimely death due to the policies of the governor, and he tried to cover it up. And that is why the governor needs to resign, along with a host of other reasons. I do think he needs to be held accountable, and certainly an investigation should continue when it comes to the sexual harassment claims. But again, he's entitled to due process on those. But we know there's a cover-up. He's basically admitted it when it comes to the nursing home scandal. And even on the vaccine rollout, the governor did such a terrible job and intervened with our counties who already had a plan in place that thousands of vaccines had to be thrown out because they were expired. And many seniors who were in peril had to go without vaccines and had to wait before the supplies were replenished. This guy has failed on so many levels. It's really time for him to go. With all the mounting Democrats even that are calling for his resignation, he really just is not in a position to govern effectively. That's why I've called for his resignation.
We'll continue to monitor that. Representative Claudia Tenney of New York, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Joining us now via Skype is Mallory Quigley, Vice President of Communications for the Susan B. Anthony List. Mallory, welcome. First, what's your reaction that the House passed both the Equality Act and the COVID relief bill without pro-life protections, especially because the previous COVID relief bill did have Hyde protections?
Yes, Catherine, this is a reflection of the reality that elections have consequences. The previous COVID relief packages were overseen by President Trump and the Trump administration, and we had the threat of the president's veto. He, of course, had promised to veto any legislation, no matter how good, if it weakened any existing pro-life protections, such as the Hyde Amendment. And we had pro-life leadership in the Senate with Mitch McConnell. So without having the White House and without pro-life Mitch McConnell, his leadership in the Senate, these bills, we are unable to add them. Even if pro-life amendments are added or offered in the Senate, it's unlikely, because we've lost the Republican majority there, that they would be added to the bill. So this is a reflection of the time that we're in and the election results of 2020.
EWTN News Nightly's White House correspondent Owen Jensen asked White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki if President Joe Biden is concerned that the Equality Act could force doctors to violate their conscience and perform abortions, gender transition surgeries, and sterilizations. Take a listen.
What does President Biden, say about those concerns?
The president's been a long supporter of Roe v. Wade. It has been his consistent belief that should be law, and he will fight to continue to protect that as being law.
Mallory, what is your response to that?
Yeah. While Owen has been doing a fantastic job in the briefing room asking these questions of the administration. It's incredibly frustrating as a fellow Catholic to hear the president continue and those around him continue to affirm that he's a longstanding, supporter of Roe versus Wade, while at the same time trying to claim a mantle of being moderate on this issue. And this, the press secretary has repeatedly pointed to the president's Catholic faith as an excuse for his opposition to the Hyde Amendment. Really, this doesn't make sense. It's speaking out of two sides of the mouth, and the disconnect that is there between the president claiming to be a devout Catholic, but then his legislative priorities and proposals and the things that he and his administration are working on really having a very negative impact on devout Catholics and people of just all faith and conscience who oppose being participating in abortion or those other activities that you mentioned.
You alluded to this earlier, but do you think the COVID relief bill and the Equality Act will get stopped in the Senate or amended to include pro-life protections? What can we expect?
That's what we are working on right now. Our government affairs team and many leaders of pro-life organizations here in Washington, D.C. are working deep into the night, working with allied legislators and their staff to try and correct some of the pro-abortion expansion. The abortion lobby's attempt to use this COVID relief package as a bailout for themselves. I mean, this is just another example of the ways that the pro-abortion lobby and the Democratic Party that supports them have used the pandemic as an excuse to usher in pro-abortion regulations, whether that's expansion of chemical abortion or bailouts for the abortion industry. So it's going to be a tough fight. And I encourage everyone and ask for people to pray for our teams that are working so round the clock.
Mallory, we have less than a minute, but the Equality Act and the American Rescue Plan, it's not popular to speak out against them because of all the positive press and their positive names. But can you quickly underline why it's important the pro-life movement speaks out?
Yes, it's important just to look past the fancy names. Something else like H.R. 1, the so-called For the People Act. What could possibly be there to oppose? Everyone loves equality. It sounds like a great idea. But to really stay educated about what these bills mean, what their impact would be, especially on the pro-life movement, there is a lot of nefarious legislation that's moving forward with, really nice names.
Mallory Quigley with the Susan B. Anthony List. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine.
President Joe Biden's nominee to be the next Health and Human Services Secretary, Javier Becerra, not only has long supported abortion, but he's been an advocate for assisted suicide as well. Becerra, who served as California's Attorney General, was praised by assisted suicide advocates when he fought to preserve the state's End of Life Option Act. That law permits certain terminally ill adults in the state to request drugs used to end their life. Becerra, a Catholic, defended that law and said it provides some relief to patients, their families, and doctors. We reached out to the Catholic Medical Association for their reaction on Becerra's support for assisted suicide. CMA tells EWTN Pro-Life Weekly in part, quote, if the United States Senate confirms the nomination of Mr. Javier Becerra as Secretary of Health and Human Services, we can reasonably anticipate an unprecedented assault on the sanctity of human life and religious liberty. And this callous indifference to the sanctity of life is not limited to the beginning of life, as California Attorney General Mr. Becerra fought vigorously to defend the state's physician-assisted suicide law, the End of Life Option Act. It is frightening to consider that if confirmed, our next Secretary of Health and Human Services actually believes a physician's prescription for a lethal dose of medication will improve the efficiency of our system of healthcare and improve the lives of Americans. Our next guest, Stephanie Gray Connors, has a new book to help tackle this tough topic. Start with What? 10 Principles for Thinking About Assisted Suicide, draws on stories of people who have endured profound suffering and equips people to converse about assisted suicide with compassion, persuasion, and grace. The author of that book, Stephanie Gray Connors, joins us now on Skype. Stephanie, welcome back. Some viewers might remember you for that pro-life talk you gave at Google that went viral. Stephanie, when it comes to discussing and debating life issues, would you say assisted suicide is even more difficult to discuss than abortion? And why, Stephanie, did you ultimately want to release this book now?
Yeah, that's a great question. In some sense, I would say it is, because it seems easier to convince someone that it's wrong to end the life of another person who has not requested their death, which is the case for the preborn child. And when it comes to assisted suicide, people might say, but wait a minute, if it's my body, my life, and I want my life ended, then shouldn't I be allowed to do that? What impact does it have on you? But the point we as pro-lifers want to get across is no man is an island. We are impacted by the presence and the absence of other people, and we ought to treat each other as family, and family members work to preserve other people's lives, not support them when they feel despairing and want to end their lives.
HHS Secretary nominee Javier Becerra has called California's assisted suicide law an important protection for families. Stephanie, what would you say are the biggest misconceptions when it comes to assisted suicide?
Well, that it solves a problem. You know, I often point out that we need to alleviate suffering without eliminating the sufferer. And assisted suicide doesn't alleviate suffering. The other point I would make is that we as humans are designed to love, both to be loved and to give love. But when someone opts for assisted suicide, they're eliminating the very life that is necessary to enter into a relationship of love. And if you look at Javier, you know, I think, well, what is the job of the Secretary of Health and Human Services? It's to support health and human services. And assisted suicide is the opposite of health, because rather than comforting and restoring someone's body to the state it should be in functioning well, it involves destroying the human person. And what is that which is inhumane? Things that are described as inhumane is like war and genocide, where innocent people are killed. And what is humane is when we preserve life. So we actually see assisted suicide as the most inhumane thing, because it is destroying another human person.
In your book, Start With What, you mentioned that society generally decries suicide, but will accept it when the word assisted is placed in front of it. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think language is so important on this topic as it is with the abortion topic. And rather than use the term euthanasia, which can often confuse people, I find assisted suicide is powerful because suicide itself is what most, if not all people, instinctively are opposed to and saddened by. That's why when famous people like Robin Williams commit suicide, they grieve over that. And so when we refer to euthanasia as assisted suicide, we're trying to tap into people's instinctive reaction that to end one's life is a sign of someone who didn't have support or help, who was despairing, and that's a tragedy to be avoided. But if that's true for suicide, then our point simply is throwing the word assisted in front of it shouldn't make a wrong thing suddenly become right. In fact, all the more, if we're assisting someone in ending their life, then we're feeding into the false narrative they have going on in their mind that their life isn't worth living. And we ought to be imparting that our fellow man and woman, they are lives that indeed are worth living and protecting.
Absolutely. You know, assisted suicide is really painted as the compassionate choice for those who advocate for it. I think because people see it as you've been talking about, an end to suffering. It's very difficult for us to wrap our heads around suffering. But, you know, Stephanie, we as Catholics, we do have a profound understanding of its purpose, don't we?
We do. And one of the things that I look to actually in my book is the insights of psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Dr. Viktor Frankl, who said that despair is suffering without meaning. And his whole point was that suffering is part of the human experience. We all have suffered and we all will suffer, but we don't have to despair in light of our suffering if we can find meaning in it. And so this perspective from a Jewish psychiatrist very much aligns with the Catholic perspective that we ought to seek and find meaning in whatever circumstance we're in, which is the idea behind the title, Start With What. It's to shift people away from the question, why am I suffering? Why is this terrible thing happened to me? And towards the question, what amazing, wonderful, incredible thing can I bring out of this terrible, horrible, awful thing? How can I find meaning in my circumstances?
For our viewers who do want to engage people on this topic of assisted suicide and they pick up your book, what is your #1 tip for how they can best do that and best converse on the topic of assisted suicide?
That's a great question. I would say to seek to understand, to remember the prayer of St. Francis who said, "O divine master, grant that I may not so much seek to be understood as to understand." And that means asking good questions, and I give examples of that in the book. And to also remember that when dialoguing with other people, we also, besides questions, want to impart stories that really move the heart and inspire people, which is why there's so many stories of people who face suffering but not given up on life. One such story, actually, Raymond Arroyo over there at EWTN has highlighted the incredible story of Maddie Stepanek, a little boy who died of muscular dystrophy, a very severe form of it. And I mention his story in my book, and his will to live is really inspiring to anyone who may be struggling. And so to be able to impart those inspiring examples, I think, is huge in reaching people.
Absolutely. And I want to direct our viewers to find more information and to get Stephanie's book. You can go to loveunleasheslife.com. Stephanie Gray-Connors, thank you so much, and congratulations on the launch of this book.
Thank you.
Coming up, a Washington Post columnist complains that fictional TV characters are choosing life over abortion. I speak out once we return.
First of all, that the right to life is the most important right of every human being.
Plus, we take you to Poland, where there's a creative pro-life initiative. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Hadro. A contributing columnist at the Washington Post says she wants to watch more abortion storylines on TV. That is this week's Speak Out segment. Washington Post contributing columnist Kate Cohen recently wrote an op-ed bemoaning the fact that a character on the Netflix show Atypical chose life for her baby instead of an abortion. Cohen writing, quote, "I was hoping that the young professional woman, upon learning she was pregnant right after her jerky boyfriend left her, might decide to have an abortion. Instead, it turns out she doesn't even consider it. I'm so tired of this." She continues writing, over and over again in TV shows and movies, female characters discover they are unintentionally pregnant and then make the choice that most women in that situation don't make. Or worse, they don't seem to remember that they even have a choice. The truth is, even the New York Times reported in 2019 that fictional abortions on TV are taking place at record levels. There have been abortion portrayals on recent shows like Veep, Shrill, Scandal. The list goes on. There's so much to say here. First, Washington Post contributing columnist Kate Cohen is wrong in claiming there are not a lot of abortions on TV. But more importantly here, it is disturbing that she wants to see more of them. In her article, Cohen calls both for legal abortions in the United States and for more fictional abortions on our television screens. For so many in the world and in the media, abortion has become an idol, a golden calf. But we cannot lose sight of what abortion is. Abortion kills an innocent unborn life. It is not health care. And it is not something that any woman in TV or in reality should aspire to get. To try to normalize it is deceptive and ultimately hurts both women and children. While Hollywood is so often in lockstep with the abortion industry, let us live in the truth that life is worth defending and that women deserve better than abortion. For this week's Pro-Life Focus, we are going global. A pro-life initiative in Poland has taken to the streets. EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief Alan Holdren reports.
Polish pro-lifers have started a billboard campaign supporting the decision of Poland's constitutional tribunal to ban abortion for unborn babies with abnormalities. Polish journalist and pro-life activist Magdalena Koszekwa-Kaliszuk says the campaign aims to remind people of the beauty of a human life.
We can observe in Poland a huge impact of an amazing campaign with over 5,000 posters all over Poland, posters with a baby in a herd.
There was a violent response by some to the campaign. The court's verdict prompted a wave of demonstrations across Poland, where the protesters directed their anger not only towards the government, but to pro-lifers as well. The chairman of the family section of the Polish Bishops' Conference, Bishop Wiesław Śmigel, says that despite the attacks, Catholics have a moral duty to protect human life at every stage of its development. Data from the Polish Ministry of Health shows that in 2019, children with Down syndrome accounted for 40% of all abortions in the country. Polish pro-lifers say that it's eugenics and that it's unacceptable.
To help families and women in crisis pregnancy.
Lech Kowalewski, an activist from Human Life International Poland, explains why this new regulation to ban abortions cannot be appealed.
First of all, that the right to life is the most important right of every human being. And if there is a conflict of rights, for example, a right to well-being or the right to comfortable life or even the so-called reproductive rights, they are of a lower importance in comparison to the right to life. And this is universal.
Pope Francis showed his support for Poland's pro-life efforts in October by welcoming Polish pilgrims coming to celebrate the 100th anniversary of St. John Paul II's birth.
Through the intercession of Mary Most Holy and the Holy Polish Pontiff, I ask God to inspire in the hearts of all respect for the life of our brothers, especially of the most fragile and defenseless, and to give strength to those who welcome it and take care of it, even when it requires heroic love.
In Rome, Alan Holdren, EWTN Pro-Life Weekly.
A big thank you to our EWTN Rome and Poland teams for bringing us that important global pro-life story. That does it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Until next time, we'd love to hear from you. Find us on social media at EWTN Pro-Life on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're there. You can also send us a message by emailing prolifeweekly@ewtn.com. We love to hear from you. Remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.